Coming up in this Brightline construction update. This update looks at two cut and throws that occurred in Melbourne near Masterson Street and the Eau Gallie River Bridge. Due to a variety of factors, including a previous temporary alignment at the Eau Gallie River Bridge and existing conditions, there were about 3/4 of a mile of isolated, unconnected track between Masterson Street and the Eau Gallie River Bridge. Looking at this diagram of the existing conditions, the white is the existing track and the gray is the new track. That gray section in the top center is the new unconnected section. Being unconnected, a same-day temporary cut and throw was done at the Masterson Street end. This allowed a work train to access the track to heavily drop ballast before a surfacing set was moved onto it and left isolated there for a week to do some of the initial surfacing work. We are now looking at this temporary cut and throw. The track was cut earlier in the day, and crews are in the process of lining the track and placing some stockpiled ballast on the connection to make it safe for the work train to pass over. The crew at the bottom is in the process of making the joint to connect the existing track that was shifted to this new track. The surfacing set that we spending the week on this track was staged just north, ready to tune up the connection before the work train arrived. Around the curve to the north, another crew was completing work on the skeletonized east main so that it would be ready to have ballast dropped on it the following week. I only stayed briefly this day, as I was headed to Fort Pierce to check on some other work that will be featured in a future video, and knowing the actual cut and throws would occur here the following week. So at the end of this day, the temporary cut and throw was restored back to its previous alignment for a week. That following week is when the same cut and throw was repeated, along with the second one between Eau Gallie Boulevard and the Eau Gallie River Bridge. This activated the west main all the way from CP Pineda to CP Melbourne, with the east track fully out of service for work to be completed on it. We'll start that next week, back near Masterson Street. By the time I arrived, the track was once again already shifted and reconnected, made easier by all the necessary cuts and holes for the joints being made the previous week. Surfacing crews were working to align and raise the tracks. Crews were using stockpiled ballast to provide for the majority of the need here, with the final ballast to be brought in by the work train later in the day. Around the curve to the north, you can see all the new ballast dropped on the new east main, ready to be surfaced. With the west track now aligned and mostly surfaced, a crew and an excavator began to roughly align the east track. Surfacing crews would come in the following week to take it from that rough alignment and smooth it out to the final alignment. The excavator just needs to get it within a few inches of where it needs to be, and the tamper can do the rest. They paused shifting the track when the regulator needed to come through again. Actually making the connections on the eastern track could be done at a later time, as it was not critical to running trains. It is worth noting that other than very rare occasions where there is no other option, the Florida East Coast Railway does not delay, change, or cancel its freight schedules for construction activities. All work is scheduled in between revenue trains, and the track is expected to be inspected and back in service by the time the next train comes. Midday on weekends typically have 6 to 8 hour windows without trains, which is why most major work is done then. At this point, I move down to the other cut and throw on the north side of the Eau Gallie River Bridge. Being the first time this cut and throw was done, this one took a little longer to complete. The connections on the west track had been made just before I arrived, and crews were just beginning to place some of the stockpiled ballast on the newly shifted track. Crews were beginning to work on making the connections on the east track here. You can see the Masterson St work in the distance here. While it was a big effort to get both cut and throws completed simultaneously, the bigger challenge was getting everything surfaced in time. 3 separate surfacing sets were brought into work. 2 would work on the cut and throws on either end, with 1 in the middle. We'll now briefly head to the south side of the Eau Gallie River. By the new intermediate signals at Sarno Road, another crew was working to install new insulated joints in the western track. Back to the cut and throw, and an excavator was working to line up the tracks so the crews could cut the rails and joint them together. I went to go film some other work, and when I came back, work train AFW1 was on site, finishing dumping ballast. It had already dumped at the Masterson St end and in between the cutovers, and was wrapping up at the Eau Gallie cut and throw location. Here you can see construction crew members unloading the last ballast on the approach to the bridge. The ballast is in Herzog solar ballast hoppers. Powered by solar panels on each end, crew members are able to control motors that open and close doors on the bottom of the cars to precisely unload the ballast. For some reason, the locomotive on the north end of the work train was cut off before dumping began in Masterson, so the crew had to go pick it up and bring it back to the train. It was followed by the fleet of surfacing equipment preparing to get everything finished. And here it is, coupling onto the train. And here it is, departing south back to Fort Pierce. We'll wrap up with one final look at Masterson St as the surfacing crew was in action. Another topic worth discussing is the crossing gates during work on the active mainline. In order to keep the gates from going up and down all day during the work and disrupting the public, crossings can either be taken out of service with a Form 82T in place if flaggers are present for the duration of the work. An alternative is having a special shunt placed on the tracks when work is ongoing, which doesn't require flaggers but limits what can be done. A shunt is in place here by the line of orange cones to prevent the Masterson Street crossing from activating. It is removed whenever equipment or trains need to pass. All of the other crossings shown in this video had flaggers on site. And here's a look at the tamper in action. When trying to raise the track, the tamper can skip ties on each pass to raise it up faster before doing a final pass where it squeezes off every tie. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Also check out my social media pages.